Uniting the clans. Is this a Pollyanna hot flash, sort of a call for an ecumenical group hug? Or is it something that could put the fear of the Lord in modernists everywhere, and maybe even turn the tables against them? Tonight on the editor's desk. Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt coming to you once again from the offices of the Remnant newspaper. So this, dear friends, is what we're up against today as Catholics in 2019. What is that? That certainly is not Catholic. That's Stevie Nicks on Quaaludes. That's the abomination of desolation, standing in the holy place. It's not Catholic. And it's really no wonder when you look at something like that, why even the geniuses over at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops had to finally come out and admit last month that 70% of practicing Catholics no longer believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. That seems a little high to me. This is a crisis in the church. And those of you who are new to all of this, new to our channel certainly, I'd like to start tonight by providing just a little bit of history of what's been going on in the Catholic Church so you can better understand this idea. Is uniting the clans against this sort of nonsense? Is it a pipe dream? Is it possible? What would it entail? What would it look like? In order to understand that, we have to go back and look at how all of this got started. Again, it's important to realize that all of this was a long time coming and didn't just start with Francis. Francis was the effect, not the cause. Francis was inevitable, in other words. Initially, only a few priests and even fewer bishops resisted what was going on because in the Catholic Church, like in the military, you have a hierarchical structure, a chain of command. So all of this revolution in the church started at the top and filtered down. And one of the priests, one of the bishops who resisted this revolution in the church was a retired French archbishop, a missionary, who was coaxed out of retirement back in 1970 to found a seminary to train priests in the old traditional Catholic liturgy and doctrine. It was called the Society of St. Pius X, and that bishop's name is Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, a key figure now to understanding both the revolution and the counter-revolution that followed. So after becoming convinced the Archbishop could no longer trust the Vatican to safeguard the faith back in 1988, he consecrated 4 bishops without mandate, without permission from the Pope. And the Pope then came out and said he had excommunicated himself, and there's been a debate about that ever since, whether the state of emergency or urgency, which is allowed for and provided for in the Code of Canon Law, the 83, the new Code of Canon Law, whether we had reached that point or not to justify extraordinary actions such as consecrating bishops without the permission of the Pope. That's the nugget of the dispute and the controversy. Now, it's really important to understand that at that time, even some of Archbishop Lefebvre's own priests panicked. They said, well, I don't know if we can resist the Pope to this degree, to his face, to consecrate bishops to really have sort of a separation from that chain of command in order to preserve the faith. So these priests broke with Archbishop Lefebvre, and with full Vatican approval, they established something called the Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter. Now, I was a kid. I was just a kid when this was going on, but I lived through it all, and I remember it. I remember, for example, how 12 years before 1988, my own father had introduced Archbishop Lefebvre to American traditionalists, to the American traditionalist movement right here in St. Paul, at a big conference that they held in order to help Archbishop Lefebvre introduce this counter-revolutionary movement of his, which was basically just a Catholic movement. He didn't change anything. He just stayed with the old Latin Mass. He stayed with the old doctrines and teachings of the church. He said, I'm not going to change anything. I'm going to do what I was taught to do. And that by 1976 was a very controversial and, counter-revolutionary thing to do because the church was in chaos. Now, at that time, I was 10 years old. When I first met Archbishop Lefebvre, I received the sacrament of confirmation from Archbishop Lefebvre, which is a huge honor for me. My point is, Archbishop Lefebvre at this point became a hero to all of us. And then 1988 happens, where he consecrates these 4 bishops, and lots of good people. Again, stick with me here for a moment. I want to try to get to the idea of motive, so we can understand who was doing what and why back then. And maybe we can see our way clear to trying to come together a little bit. So when this happened, my father, he could not go along with the 1988 consecrations. In conscience, he couldn't go along with it. But what I want you to remember, if you remember anything from this episode, is that this was devastating to him. He knew Archbishop Lefebvre. He loved Archbishop Lefebvre. We all did. In 1988, broke my father's heart, okay? Keep that in mind now as we move to the next section here. Because this family history is relevant to all of us. I know many of you out there, for example, believe that the Fraternity of St. Peter betrayed Archbishop Lefebvre. And now I'm not asking you to agree with what they did. I'm asking for something much simpler. I'm asking you to just consider, maybe I should use the word reconsider, what motivated these priests to do what they did, the priests that formed the Fraternity of St. Peter. Now remember, the priests that formed the Fraternity of St. Peter were priests of the Society of St. Pius X initially. They were traditionalists. They were ordained by Archbishop Lefebvre. They were his men. But they feared that the Archbishop was making a mistake. In the middle of this chaotic situation in the church, they feared he was making a mistake. Just as my own father, for a time, also feared that the Archbishop was making a mistake. Just like a lot of good men who hadn't had the benefit of seeing into the eyes of the beast, which is what Archbishop Lefebvre did. He was at the council. He signed the documents of Vatican II. Remember this too, and that's for another program. People say, well, the Fraternity of St. Peter, they don't condemn Vatican II. Don't forget that the great Archbishop Lefebvre signed the documents, hoping that there might be a continuity, there might be a hermeneutic of continuity, or somehow that the documents would be interpreted by good men. That's how devilishly clever and modernist the Second Vatican Council is and was. It wasn't easy for anybody. And so it's so easy for us now, with our 2020 hindsight and our little blogs and all that, to go back and say, we would have done it differently. We would have known exactly who was on first. We would have had no question where the line was and all of that. But there was nothing easy about this back in reality at that time period. These were unprecedented times. This was an unprecedented revolution. And the idea that some men didn't want to break with the structure of the church, with the Vatican, with Rome, this is an inherently, fundamentally good and Catholic instinct. They weren't doing it because they wanted to be, partying with the modernists. You see, there's a difference there. Archbishop Lefebvre himself was torn apart to the very root of his soul over what he felt in conscience he had to do. Remember, he had served as, like I say, one of the greatest missionaries of the 20th century, as head of the Holy Ghost Fathers. He was a personal friend of Pope Pius XII. He had served the church loyally as a prince of the church his entire life. He didn't want to break with Rome. It broke his heart. So I would say that to those of us, going back to the uniting of the clans idea, if you think of Archbishop Lefebvre as a renegade, as a rebel, you've simply never read him. You didn't understand what this man went through, the torment this man went through when he realized that he had to take extraordinary steps.
You need this life of our Lord Jesus Christ to go to heaven. This life of our Lord Jesus Christ is disappearing everywhere in the conciliar church. They are following roads which are not Catholic roads. They simply lead to apostasy. This is why we do this ceremony. Far be it from me to set myself up as a pope. I am simply a bishop of the Catholic Church who is continuing to transmit, to hand down the Catholic doctrine.
And he tried to use the law, the code of canon law, to justify this, to say, this is a state of emergency. I have to do this for the faith, to preserve the faith. You don't have to agree with him. But in fairness and in honesty, you have to try to understand why he did it. And you have to sympathize with what was motivating him. His motivation was to preserve the faith. And it was not about who was right and who was wrong. That's not what I'm talking about tonight. I'm talking about good men on both sides who were torn apart by revolution in the church. Oh, of course, Archbishop Lefebvre felt betrayed in 1988 by his own priest who formed the Fraternity of St. Peter. Of course he did. But we can't leave the whole polemic in 1988. We have to bring it forward and see how things developed since then. But yes, he felt betrayed by his own. But here's the thing. You must understand, they were brothers, the society and now this fledgling fraternity. They were brother priests, divided not by their own designs, but by revolution, by modernists in the church who were tearing the hell out of the Catholic Church. And good men ended up on both sides, just like good men ended up on both sides of the captivity of the papacy in Avignon a long time before. It wasn't clear. It wasn't easy. And so this fledgling traditional Catholic movement, hardly out of the gate, found itself torn in half. Civil war already, trying to deal with this. With one side fearing that the Society of St. Pius X was going to elect its own pope, start its own petite église, a little church, leave the church. And then the other side predicting and fearing that this new fledgling Fraternity of St. Peter would become bi-ritual, would sell out to the modernists, would sell out tradition. That was what was going on. That was what divided this family after 1988. And here's the part. Here's the part that takes a little bit of thinking outside the box. Because now when we look back, 30 years later, can we not see that the power of the Mass, the power of the Roman Rite, the traditional Catholic Mass of saints and martyrs and virgins, that Mass and the grace of God himself helped these two brothers bitterly opposed to one another in the face of revolution, nevertheless helped them build a worldwide traditional Catholic revival movement that has terrified and angered and infuriated the modernist revolutionaries. That is the reality. That's what happened. And I'm sorry, friends, but I see Archbishop Lefebvre, who I think someday will be a canonized saint. He was the Athanasius of our time. He wasn't perfect. Could have maybe done something better. But nobody did more to serve the church at this time of revolution than he did in terms of in the hierarchy. And I see him as the godfather, if you will, to all of these orders of priests, to the traditional Catholic Mass restoration movement. He was it. Because before him, there was nothing. And again, I remember this. I'm old enough to remember. There was no traditional Latin Mass. There was no hope. There were hippies and guitars and felt banners, and that was about it. We traditional Catholics at that point had to go underground literally to find the old Mass. Some of us attended traditional Mass in basements and in hotels. Others sought refuge in the Eastern Catholic rites. But the Roman Rite at that point was in full-on Woodstock hippie chaos. And traditionalists had no home. And really, to a large extent, humanly speaking, had no hope. It wasn't until Archbishop Lefebvre came along. I remember my father ran a traditional Catholic newspaper, the oldest traditional Catholic newspaper in the world. It would be so easy for me to say, it was the remnant that saved the day. My father was in 1967 started the newspaper, 2 years before the promulgation of the new Mass. It was my dad who saved everything. But it took someone in the hierarchy and who had that rank of archbishop to make the Vatican pay attention. So it wasn't until Archbishop Lefebvre came along, a council father at Vatican II, personal friend of Pius XII. That's when the revolution of Vatican II hit its first massive speed bump. And they never completely got past that. You see, because of Lefebvre then, the motu proprio Ecclesiae Dei, as flawed as it was, partly restored the traditional Mass, then Summorum Pontificum, as flawed as that is as well, brought the traditional Latin Mass roaring back into the life of the Church. And again, it was an answer to what Archbishop Lefebvre had done. By his fruits, we can know him as a loyal son of the Church, who had to do extraordinary things in order to bring this all about. And all the while, Lefebvre Society, as the motu proprios came about and traditional Latin Mass began to make this comeback, Archbishop Lefebvre's own Society of St. Pius X only grew stronger during the same period. So again, we see the hand of God in all this. Finally, the Society of St. Pius X built I think the largest seminary in North America in 100 years or something. So successful have they been during the same time period. Friends, we can see the hand of God in all this. This is providence. Both of the brothers then, working together despite each other, despite their disagreements, and the disagreements are very real, both of them worked to frustrate modernists everywhere. Modernists who had tried so hard to abrogate the Roman Rite forever. And because of these priests on both sides, the modernists failed. And now even diocesan priests all over the world are taking advantage of Summorum Pontificum, and they're offering the Latin Mass to people who would never, by the way, have found either the Society of St. Pius X or the Fraternity of St. Peter. I mean, when something backfires against modernists, it backfires big. And this one backfired really big. And I'm not going to take this away from Archbishop Lefebvre. He's the one that did it. Whether you're fraternity, society, Institute of Christ the King, diocesan, if that man hadn't done what he did, you wouldn't have your Mass. And I don't go to the traditional Mass at the Society of St. Pius X. I'm not a spokesman for them. This is just the history. This is what happened. This is simply the truth. So, here we are, 30 years later. The predicted nightmares and horrible scenarios from 1988 never really materialized. Far from a renegade outfit hell-bent on starting their own little church, the Society of St. Pius X has continued to pray for the Pope and for the local bishop at every Mass that they say everywhere in the world every day. Now, if this is a schism, it's the weirdest schism in the history of the Church. And on the other side of the coin, far from becoming some neo-modernist, bi-ritual, goofy organization, the Fraternity of St. Peter has been offering the traditional Latin Mass to tens of thousands of people who would never, ever have set foot in an SSPX chapel otherwise. So they really are not siphoning from the society, as people say. By the way, this is to give you an idea, those of you who are still operating with 25, 30-year-old talking points against the Fraternity of St. Peter, let me tell you just a quick story. When they were installed here in Minneapolis, the Fraternity of St. Peter, they were given the opportunity to select their own swearing-in oath or text that the Archdiocese was going to come over and hear them and see them installed officially as pastors and priests of the parish. And so they were again, allowed to choose their own text. Now, to those of you who say these guys are a bunch of sellouts who are just, neo-modernists, guess what text the Fraternity of St. Peter priests selected for the diocesan representative to read to their congregation on that day? It was nothing less, you remember this, nothing less than St. Pius X's Oath Against the Errors of the Modernists. This was one of the most brilliantly ironic moments in the history of our Archdiocese. I will never forget it. There's a lot more going on with these young men than maybe some of you think, who haven't really given them a thought since 1988. They're doing some pretty cool things. And they're dedicated to the traditional Latin Mass, So in God's providence, once again, these two brothers, despite a bitter rivalry, which probably will continue for a long time, they brought millions and millions of people back to tradition, back to the Latin Mass. So there's the history. I'm going on too long. Now we're going to talk just briefly about uniting the clans and what that means. What would it look like to unite the clans? Now that, especially now, we got Pope Francis, who's made everything really tragically clear as far as what the modernists have in mind for the Church. But how do we unite? How is that possible to unite the clans? There's a lot of differences, a lot of water under the bridge, a lot of hard feelings, a lot of bad blood. Now, in the old Mel Gibson movie, I understand this is a terribly flawed movie, so please don't fill the comm box with examples of why Gibson's Braveheart was over the top, historically inaccurate, or whatever. I get it. I'm not doing a movie review here. But the character, William Wallace, in this old film, if you'll remember, he can't unite the clans on his own. He can't do it on his own. So he appeals to the higher authority among the nobles, which is Robert the Bruce, the highest ranking noble, if you will. Remember this?
Help me. In the name of Christ, help yourselves. Now is our chance. Now. If we join, we can win. If we win, well, then we'll have what none of us have ever had before. A country of our own. Unite us. Unite us. Unite the clans.
In our case, The old faith itself is Robert the Bruce. The old faith, that's what we appeal to. The faith can unite the clans if we can just get out of the way. And what's the point of uniting the clans? This is important because I'm the first to not want to be the Pollyanna guy where you just overlook your differences in order to get along. That's nonsense. That's false and phony ecumenism. That's not what we're talking about tonight. I'm not looking for the great big ecumenical group hug. The clans can only unite for one purpose and in one place, and that's the battlefield. To fight a common enemy trying to crush everything that all the clans hold sacred. Do you understand? Modernists have always had one agenda where all of us are concerned, where all of the clans, so to speak, are concerned, the clans of Catholic tradition. And that is to divide and conquer, to polarize us, to keep us apart, because they know if we ever get over ourselves long enough to figure it out, that what unites us is everything they spent centuries trying to destroy. What unites us terrifies them because it is stronger than anything they know. What unites us is our common belief in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. What unites us is Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. What unites us is the Holy Ghost, the Holy Catholic Church, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. The stuff that unites Catholics for 2,000 years. We're all committed, in addition to that, we're all committed to the old Latin Mass, to the Catholic Restoration, to defending to the death the Queenship of Mary and the Kingship of Christ. Compared to all that, what divides us, friends, is stuff and nonsense. It is nothing. So the clans, friends, they must unite in battle. But that's not to say we're gonna get along. That's not the point, getting along. Jaded and scarred, we may meet on this field that I'm talking about and say to one another, you're still a bastard, but let's drive these ruddy modernists and pedophiles out of our church. Can you imagine if we could get over ourselves to the point where we would say that? We would become the terror of modernists if we could do that. We could change history. And that's exactly what we're going to do. That's exactly what we must at least try to do. Forget about liking each other. That may never happen. This is not kindergarten. This is the real world. But here's the thing, friends. With scapulars around our necks, with rosaries in our hands, and the faith of our fathers in our hearts, we are a band of Catholic brothers, whether we like each other or not. So let's start behaving that way. And by the way, on a practical level, our priests have never been crusaders. Priests have never led crusades. They hear the confessions of the crusaders. They provide spiritual armor for the crusaders, but they are not the crusaders. So we, the laity, we need to do this on our own. So here's a little hint how this is going to work, practically speaking. If you're in the Society of St. Pius X, please do not go ask Father if it's okay for you to attend the Fraternity of St. Peter. You know what he's going to say. And if you're in the Fraternity of St. Peter, give Father a break. Don't ask him if it's okay for you to frequent the other side, go play for the other team. You know what he's going to say. Don't put him on the spot like that. We all need to put our big boy pants on, and we need to think for ourselves here. Enough with this clericalism. Father, is it okay if I breathe? And another thing, we've all got skin in this game. That's the other problem. Everybody whining, We need to stop whining about how mean the other guys were, and they didn't go to my wedding, and I wouldn't go to their wedding because they didn't go to mine, and all this. Oh, gosh, it's got to stop. Because we've all got family and friends on the other side of the line in this thing. We've all gone through a sort of ecclesiastical version of the Hatfields and the McCoys, right? There's plenty of hurt, there's plenty of betrayal, plenty of bad blood to go around for all of us. It was, again, time to grow up a little bit. We're all human, and that's not going to change anytime soon, I hope. But we're not talking about our feelings. You know what? The Society of St. Pius X over the years, I think maybe even right now, I'm not sure, they've banned my newspaper quite a few times. Right now, I think it's banned from the seminary, I don't know why. They got their reason, whatever it is. But banning my newspaper from a major traditionalist demographic, that hurts. That hurts us. Guess what? I couldn't care any less. I don't care. This is not about my turf. It's not about my newspaper, my opinion, my precious feelings. The society has worth. They're important what they're doing, whatever their relationship is with me personally. That doesn't matter. That's not what this is about. You know what? If you don't like me because I'm from the other clan, I don't care about that either. Fine. I'm not asking you to like me. I'm asking you to stand with me and fight. I'm seeing if there's any possible way that we can stand together and fight against people who are really do hate everything about us. If one clan can't get along with the other clan, just for the sake of the front, the united front against the demons, don't attack the other clan. Just go quiet. Just stay quiet. They're not trying to do anything more than serve Christ, bring back the Latin Mass, raise little kids, teach them their catechism. That's all they're doing. So you don't like them, you think they're too compromised, or you think they're too rigid or whatever, just leave them alone. They're on our side of the battlefield. And why should we leave them alone? Because our mortal enemy, friends, they do not recognize the differences between the clans that we all think are so crucially important and obvious. They're only obvious to us. They're only important to us. To the enemy, we're all cockroaches. We all need to be exterminated. We're all haters. They want us all silenced. They want the followers of Christ to cease to breathe. Don't you understand? So focus on them, not on me, not on the other clan. The other clan is not your enemy. We're all fellow soldiers of Jesus Christ, sons of God, heirs of heaven, united in the cross of Jesus Christ. So friends, let's get over ourselves. We can do this. We can really unite the clans if we just get out of our own way. I'm not talking pie in the sky or some sort of idealistic, theorizing. This is already happening, friends, all over the world. And if you want to see exactly how it's happening, if you want to get involved in this, come on out to the Catholic Identity Conference, which is uniting the clans in the real world, out in Pittsburgh, November 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Bishop Athanasius Schneider is going to be there. Father Wagner, the Society of St. Pius X, U.S. District Superior, is a bigwig. Father Pendergraft of the Fraternity of St. Peter, another bigwig, will be there, along with dozens of other diocesan priests and other traditional order priests. Are all going to be there. And these good men are not getting together for an ecumenical group hug. It takes courage for them to do what they're going to do in November. It's not easy. They have serious differences with each other, and they take flack from their own organizations for being willing to do this. But here's the thing. When these good priests, when they look out across the battlefield now, they see the devil himself standing there now. He's standing there in front of all of us. And not only is he standing there, but he's advancing. And these priests know that it's time. It's time for all of us to do whatever we possibly can to unite and stand against him. If it's God's will, this uniting of the clans is going to happen. If it's not God's will, it's not going to happen. Simple as that. But now that total war has been declared on tradition, on the church, we Catholics must try to rise above ourselves and to stand together, if nowhere else, then at least and at last on this battlefield, to defend our homes, our children, our churches, our Mass, and whatever else is ours as members of the mystical body of Christ. Please, friends, join us in this. Let's get together on this. Let's pray for this intention. God help us. Let the clans of Holy Tradition unite at long last. I'm Michael Matt for Remnant TV, and we'll see you next time.